Okay, everybody, I am here. Running late and behind for this class. I couldn't find my notes from last Thursday that I read to you, which seems nearly impossible because I just had them on Thursday. So I don't know why I can't find them. But I can't find them, and that bothered me because I wanted to wrap up with giving you a slide on the things that God said about who he was to Job, right? So I have a slide about Job here, and we talked a lot about him, but I did not, the last scripture that we read on Job was how God describes himself. So I had all of those lists of things. Did you put, set the stars in the sky? Did you put, earth on its course? Did you, are you able to tame the Leviathan? Those kinds of things. So I wanted to have that list, and I just cannot find that notebook. I have so many notebooks around here, but how I can't find that one just seems so odd because I've been using it, and I just don't, usually lose those things. Today, we are talking about Abraham. Now, what I said I wanted to do for this class was I wanted to highlight, because what we're doing for this class is we're finding out who God is, right? So image and likeness, if we are supposed to be in his image and likeness, we need to find out who he is first. So starting with scripture, right? And we started with Genesis and the things that he made, right? So talking about that. Then we went to Job, and now we're going back. If you look at the chronological order, and I have got to thank the website, which I didn't put up there in my little explanation there, but the website effectivechurchcom.com, effectivechurchcom.com, and it's so you'll find that Bible in chronological order there, which is where I got that from. And so you see there, if we do it in chronological order, that we start with Genesis, then we go to Job and Job's whole story, and then we go back to Genesis. And as I've said, we go to back to Genesis after Noah and God's covenant with Noah that he would never again flood the earth to destroy his people, right? So now, like I said, what I wanted to do now is to basically not really go through the Bible, because I am not that kind of an expert, but to highlight the main players of the Bible, all right? So the very first major player then, beyond Job and Adam and Eve, right? And we also have got the story of the Tower of Babel. And I talk a lot about that actually in the early bird classroom on Thursday. A lot about it with a lot of pictures, and I brought that up here as well in this classroom on Thursday as well. So when we're talking about and looking at Abraham, here are the facts that I basically put together about him that I think are the most important facts. And so first of all, it is the longest, most important story in the book of Genesis. And God asked Abraham to travel from Ur to Haran, and then to Canaan, the land of Canaan. And that's where he ended up settling, was in the land of Canaan. So he traveled from Ur, and Ur was known for its moon worship. And even members of his family had names after the moon gods and goddesses. So God taking Abraham out of this land and then bringing him to Haran for 5 years, and then to the land of Canaan, where along the way he made this covenant with Abraham. He made these promises to Abraham. So just like he made a covenant with Noah, he made a covenant with Abraham. And this is the main covenant that God makes, or main promise that he makes for all the generations of people. He makes that with Abraham then. So here I've got the map here. So we're talking about Here is So this is in, and we've talked about this before. So here's my atlas of Bible lands that I have. And it's just sometimes easier to pull out a book than it is to, get all these pictures and make sure that I get all the credits where everything is supposed to get. So we talked about this actually in here a little bit, but in the early bird classroom, we talk a lot more about it. So here we've got the city of and the city of looks like it is down south of Edom here. Here is the Dead Sea or the Salt Sea. Which, if I'm not mistaken, is up here. So you can't see it. And here's a Dead Salt Sea. And here is where is. So I believe, is somewhere over here. I wish that we had a better picture of it. Oh, there it is. There it is. I knew there it is, right there, almost right in the crack there. So here is and here is Sinai, and Mount Sinai is here. So here's the Sinai Peninsula here, which is between Egypt and East Middle East, right? So Saudi Arabia, Babylon, Iraq. This Babylonia area here is current day Iraq there. All right. So here is where Abraham traveled from. And I will show you here on the map that I have here. I do have one map for you. So I got this from Google Earth. And I don't know why, again, Google Earth is still in its trial phase or experimental phase. Seriously, Google, who are you not paying to keep that in an experimental phase? All right, so right there is Mount Zion. So in the big picture, right in the center there, you can see the red circle that is locating Mount Zion there. In the corner to the right there, I've got other areas that I have marked, and those areas I marked for the early bird classroom. There are 2 red marks on there. One of them is Mount Sinai. So the one on the Sinai Peninsula, right towards the southwest of the Sinai Peninsula, that is Mount Sinai there. So that is where Moses saw the burning bush. Then if you look at that inset again, all the way, and I'm going to blow that inset up a little bit for you, or actually a lot for you. So there's the inset there. So you could see Mount Sinai is the circle there that's right in the center. And then the red circle that is off to the left, or I'm sorry, that is off to the right, is where the Tower of Babel was built. So in Babylon there, so just a bit south of there is where Abraham came from. And where he traveled to then is Canaan, the land of Canaan. And the land of Canaan is where it is oh, seriously, I did not put those notes down. It is Mount what? Oh my goodness. It's not there. hold on. Mount Moriah. That's what it is. Mount Moriah. Oh, I thought it would come to me, and it did. I didn't look. I couldn't find it. Mount Moriah is the mountain that is there, that is in the large map there. So in the large map, on the large map, turn your finger, pull it back. Up here. So I'm on the large map up there. I can't go further in, otherwise my finger will disappear. So the large map up there, that is Mount Moriah. That is where Abraham went to sacrifice his son Isaac to God. Now, some of these are common stories if you read the Bible. If you don't read the Bible, I'm going to go into the stories at least a little bit so that you can get, I'm obviously not going to go into, well, not obviously, I am not going to go into the stories like you would see or like you would hear in the Bible. But what I am going to do is get my live presentation over here. There we go. Okay. So not going into all of the detail here about his story, but trying to highlight some of the main points. I think that's what I was going to say. I was playing around over here. I was playing too much with what I was doing. Lost track. So there you have got, all right, just do it this way, Annette. There we go. Okay, so there we have Mount Moriah, and that is where Abraham sacrificed his son Isaac, or went to sacrifice his son Isaac. So that is a main story in Abraham's story. I'm going to highlight the main stories in his story. But here, on these maps here, you've got two different red dots there. One in the middle of the Sinai Peninsula there, or actually towards the west, southwest of the Sinai Peninsula. That is Mount Sinai. That's where Moses saw the burning bush. And then over here, further over here and north is where the Tower of Babel was built. So is just, it is actually right there. Is right there where the Tower of Babel was built. So this is very interesting, historically speaking, about what we're talking about, the areas that we're talking about, the Holy Land. Mount Sinai is in the middle of Jerusalem. Mount Moriah is in the land of Canaan. The land of Canaan is a cursed land, and it's a cursed land because of Noah's son Ham. Noah's son Ham basically set up an indiscretion, is what he did. He set up an indiscretion with his father Noah, and therefore Noah cursed all of Ham's son Canaan's offspring. Canaan and the offspring. It's not by far the worst thing that has happened in Canaan there, but it's the beginning of the foundation for the Israelites taking over that land. Why? Because the people of that land were cursed and had performed for 400 years atrocities, including sacrificing children and people, and sacrificing people, but in particular children. So when you hear in the Old Testament that the Israelites were basically at war with many of the lands there, it was basically all in the land of Canaan, and it has to do with the spiritual practices that were going on there for hundreds of years that were abhorrent to God. All right, so that kind of gives you a little bit of a background. I don't know how familiar you are with Old Testament Bible, but most people know that Old Testament Bible, God appears to be ruthless. The part of God's ruthlessness is that when God appears to be ruthless is when he saves the Israelites from Egypt, so 10 Commandments style, right? Crossing the Red River or the Red Sea, going into the land of Canaan. But they needed a pure land for the people so that they were not intermingling with idol worshipers, and that didn't occur. So Israelites came in, God said, destroy the Canaanites, you have reason to have this land. We need to purify the land of all that's been going on here. They didn't do it thoroughly, and therefore we still have the same kinds of, well, that's what I'm suggesting is in Mesopotamia, right? So where the Aztecs came in, I'm suggesting came from, they were chased out of the land of Canaan and practicing the same kinds of things there in Mexico and Central America, right? Okay, all right. So why this reputation for God, this reputation that God is a ruthless God in the Old Testament? There it is, right there. It is in the promise to Abraham and the descendants for this land, the promise to them for this land. But first, what had to happen was 400 years of that land, the Canaanites disobeying God, 400 years, the same 400 years that the Israelites were in captive in Egypt, 10 Commandment style, right? And when they were set free, the job was to clear the Canaanites out of there, and they had the promised land. Why did they have the right to do that? Because of the Abrahamic covenant, which I have there on the right. So God promised them that land. Why did God promise them that land? Because he was chasing out a very bad people, is what he was doing, which they didn't thoroughly do. They didn't thoroughly follow God's commandment. And we see then the repercussions of those people moving into other lands using those same kinds of worship traditions, which was human sacrifice. Okay, all right. Let's go ahead and take a look at now all of the things about Abraham and Abraham's story. So again, you can find Abraham's story in Genesis, and Genesis is the first book of the Bible. The first 5 books of the Bible are called the Pentateuch. But where you can find Abraham's story would be Genesis 12. So Abraham and Sarah, the story starts at Genesis 12. And so the very first thing that God asked Abraham to do was to leave his country. Go from your country, your people, your father's household, to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. Now, this is the Abrahamic covenant that I have there on the right. So there are 4 promises that God made. So that's a covenant, right? A covenant is a promise. And in the Abrahamic covenant, there were 4 promises that God made. So those promises are listed in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. And those promises are, Abraham was promised a great nation. So he would have a great nation. Canaan was the land that they were going to be given. They weren't given it right away, but he was promised a great nation. His offspring were promised a great land. All right. So let's see. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I'm sorry. That shouldn't be a great land. It should be a great name. Yeah. And so great land, a great name, that is. So his offspring were promised a great name, because they were already promised a great nation, a great name. So people would remember forever the name of Abraham. Abraham's descendants would be a great people. People would look on the Jewish people as a great people. And given all the small number of people in this tribe of Jews, of Israelites, right? With all the attacks that have been on this people, and yet still they have been a great people. we have people complaining about the fact that, for example, Jewish people own all the banks. Jewish people own businesses, too many businesses. Jewish people own Hollywood. After all the years of persecution, 6,000 years of persecution, they still have a great name. The United States of America still defends Israel, made a nation for the Israelites, for the Jewish people. In 1946, the United States, after World War II, gave the Jewish people their own land for the first time ever. So Jewish people were basically nomadic people since Abraham, never having a real land of their own. Even when we see this land here of getting that, they never sufficiently got rid of the Philistines, the Canaanites, the Hittites. They never sufficiently got rid of all of those people there. And so they never had a land that was called the Jewish land until 1946, when after World War II, the United States gave them that land, Jerusalem, and that Gaza Strip there, right? Israel, where Israel is, right? Okay, all right. So after all these 6,000 years of identifying these people and persecuting and enslaving these people, they still have a great name, a name that some people don't like, right? Some people really don't like. But still, the forefather of Christianity, the forefather of the Muslim religion. So even if you don't like the Jewish religion for all of the reasons why I described, and somewhat without detail, right? They are still only part of the group that reveres Abraham as their forefather and understands the covenant, right, of it. So all of those people have been blessed. So back to the Abrahamic covenant. So Abraham's descendants will be a great people, and they will all have a great blessing. And we can see that again, it's a great name, right? It's a great nation. It has become a great nation. And these people have a great blessing. So a great nation, a great land, a great name, and a great blessing. It did say a great land there, though, but it should be a great people. I think that's what it should say. I'm using the notes from, I use the notes from Oak Point Church because Oak Point Church went through the Bible in great detail. So Oak Point, my local Oak Point Church, and this was Bob Shyrock, who is retired from Oak Point Church. He finished this up a couple years ago and did it for 6 years. And so I've got all the notes, and these are the notes that I'm using. Along with scripture and some other things. But the main notes that I'm using are from Bob Shyrock, the pastor from Oak Point. Okay, so so that's what he was saying. But I know it's supposed to be a great blessing there, that you will be a great blessing. So let's see here. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make you a great name, a great nation, a great name, a great blessing, and a great people. So all the people on the earth will be blessed. I think that's that. I'll look at that again. I did take that right directly from his notes, and I know he said it over and over again, although I feel like it wasn't said exactly the same every time. Okay, all right. So what else? Abraham, which was Abram at the time, put Sarai, so Sarah, so you could see the names were changed. And we know the father of a multitude, right? The father of religion, basically. The father of almost 70% of the people believe in Abraham, in the God of Abraham. So this is the God of Abraham that we believe in. Abraham meaning father of a multitude. That was part of God's promise. A great people, a great land, right? A great nation, and a great blessing to all. Those were the things. A great people, a great land, a great nation, and a blessing to all. Yeah, that's it. And Sarah means princess, but their names before God's blessing was Abram, before the covenant, and God's blessing was Abram and Sarai. And as we know, Sarai was without child. She was barren, is what we call it. So barren, unable to have children. And so before God made the promise to them to have children, they were well, in some ways they were nomads. So they were twice at the mercy of the Pharaoh in Egypt. Because of famine, they had to go there. But because Abraham was somebody who was important in the land of Ur, he was a guest of Pharaoh. As a guest of Pharaoh, this happened two times. What Abraham did. So this is going to show you. I'm going to talk about in Abraham's story the shortcomings of Abraham. Right? So we have the covenant, knowing that these people, the descendants of Abraham, were going to have a great nation. They were going to be a great people. They were going to have a great blessing, and they were going to have a great, land name, and a great name. And we know the descendants of Abraham. We know, we are familiar with the promise God made to Abraham. Okay, so there's the Abrahamic covenant, but the real story with all of these individuals who are a great people as God promised is that they are people. They are human beings, and they do have shortcomings, and their shortcomings are not covered up by scripture. And this is a really important point because the stories that we have from the Marvel comics or from television or from the Japanese cartoons, whatever you call those things, it's always the same storyline. Or even from, if you take a look at mythology, it's always the same storyline, and that is that the Greek god, the hero, wins out, and every choice that the hero makes, although the hero may not be filled with confidence, is still a good choice, is for the better. And that simply is not the case with human beings at all, right? We are sinful creatures. And it demonstrates that it was not the case even for God's chosen people. So I highlighted the things that we remember most about Abraham. One of them is the sacrifice of his son Isaac to God. So we remember that. We also remember that God had promised Sarah a child, and Sarah laughed because she was very old. She was 75 years old when God promised her a child. So she was well beyond childbearing years. But what she did was she went to her servant Hagar because she hadn't had her baby yet. So God made the promise through travelers. God told, there were travelers, and the travelers came through and told Abraham, God has said you're going to have a child. What happened was Sarah laughed, right? God said you laughed. She said, no, I didn't. So she lied to God, said she didn't laugh. She named her son Isaac, which means laughter, gift of laughter, right? And she didn't think it was true. And so she was kind of like, well, maybe God didn't really mean I was going to have a child, as often was the case. If a woman was barren, her servant might have children for her. This happened, it was a similar case with Joseph. So we'll get to that story a little bit later on. So we see that this happens often, is that is that women will have children with their servants. They'll provide servants. So Sarah went to Hagar, her servant, and allowed Abraham to sleep with Hagar. All right, can we not see the tragedy unfolding here? And she had a son, Ishmael. And Ishmael and Hagar went out to the desert to die because they were not wanted. Then Sarah got pregnant. They were not wanted. God said, return. And Abraham and Sarah and Hagar did all raise together Ishmael. But Ishmael was about 12 when Sarah got pregnant with Isaac. So lots of turmoil in the family as Hagar really lauded over Sarah the fact that she had a child from Abraham. They went behind God's back basically and said, maybe this is the way God is going to have us have children, and created really a divide between basically what amounts to the Muslim and Christian religion, a divide that began there with Ishmael and that tribe going one way, and Isaac and Abraham's descendants going a different way. And that great divide still exists today. That hot kind of anger that occurs because of infidelity, dishonesty, and separation in family, right? Okay, so we see that the most important thing to remember here is that Abraham and Sarah were far from perfect. And that is the thread that we see through God's chosen people. That is why. Who are God's chosen people? They are the example for us. They are the example of hard times and sinful behavior and God's mercy and forgiveness. I don't think I would necessarily want to be the example, right? Because really their falls are so great, as they were a great people, as Abraham was a great man, as Job was a great man, and known in the whole area as being a great person, right? So when you're known as being a great person, that fall from grace, as we saw with Job, can really be a giant fall. So what were the kinds of what were the things that Abraham did that made him look more human to us, as opposed to this saint? How did he look more human to us? So as we know, he asked Hagar, or Abraham and Sarah had Hagar have Abraham's child, which caused a rift that we still feel today. The 9/11 attacks, the roots are right there in the story of Isaac, Ishmael, Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, starting right there as the foundation for 9/11. So this really is an extraordinary story in the beginnings of extraordinary history. In fact, I have got papers from 9/11 about the stories that they ran in the newspapers that go back to this story right here, that they ran in 2001, 9/11, 2001, about this history of Abraham right here. So really a story that you want to know. So that was a great sin, I would say. I would call it a sin, a great divide that they put in their relationship. But Abraham, it's not the first time that Abraham lost his faith in God's plan. There were two other times where Abraham went to meet Pharaoh. So I started to say, so Abraham went to meet Pharaoh two times. There was famine in the country, and so they went to Egypt. We see this happen a lot, that they will go to Egypt. Egypt was very prosperous and basically purchase food because there was no food available. It wasn't growing, crops were destroyed, whatever. So they had to go there and purchase food from the Pharaoh. Well, Abraham's wife Sarah was apparently so beautiful, and he was afraid that they would harm, Abraham was afraid they would harm him for his wife. So they would kill Abraham and take his wife. And so what Abraham said was, 2 times he did this to the Pharaoh. 2 times he fooled the Pharaoh. The first time, the Pharaoh went and laid next, both times he laid with Sarah, because Abraham told the Pharaoh that Sarah was his sister. So Abraham lied, told the Pharaoh that Sarah was his sister, so that Abraham wouldn't be hurt. What did the Pharaoh want to do? Sleep with his beautiful sister. She wasn't taken, and she wasn't Abraham's. He laid down next to her, but God prevented anything from happening, as there were plagues that were then enforced or came down on Egypt. Why? Because the Pharaoh was laying with Sarah, Abraham's wife, the descendants, the father of the multitudes, and she is a princess. Her name means princess. She probably shouldn't be laying with the Pharaoh. This happened twice. The second time, the Pharaoh was very angry with Abraham. It was a different Pharaoh, right? So not the same Pharaoh fooled twice. A different Pharaoh at a different time was very angry. Why would you deceive me this way? When I desire this woman and you don't even have the wherewithal to say she is my wife. He was afraid. So there are 2, to me, very great misdeeds on Abraham's part. To put up his wife like that, as if she were just a piece of property, in the name of what? It sounded like in the name of trying to save yourself, not anything that was really helping Sarah out. And so that was really an interesting read right there, to find that he didn't do it just once, but he did it twice. And I remember the first time I read it, I had to reread it because I was like, am I reading this right? He really did offer his wife to Pharaoh, not offer her, but basically put her out there, right? Just made her completely vulnerable to the desires of Pharaoh, knowing that he would want her. What is the matter with him sometimes? Oh my gosh, how men sometimes run these things right into the ground, including their relationships, is beyond me. Although Sarah really did have the idea about Hagar, so that was more Sarah's idea than it was Abraham's idea. So there are those 2 sins that are misdeeds that Abraham can really be sort of accused of. There is then God. So Abraham put Sarai in a compromising position twice. He did that. Lot and Abram separate. So here is where they end up getting their land. And so what Lot takes, because Abraham allowed Lot first choice of all the land that was before them, that God was promising them. And Lot took the most fertile land by the Jordan River, is what he did. And this area is further east than the area in Jerusalem that area around, Canaan there, that area around Canaan, that's where that red mark is there, Mount Zion, that Abraham ended up taking. All right. So Lot is Abraham's nephew. His father died. Lot's father died, and Abraham helped sort of take care of Lot. And then they separated, and Lot ended up getting the more fertile land. But the promise was made to Abraham. So God's promise was for a promised land, to have this promised land. And so he was there. There were crops that were growing on that land. There were cattle that were thriving on the land. It ended up being a as God promised, right? Great land for their prosperity, for their offspring, right? For them to produce offspring, a multitude of offspring, family, right? Okay. So we already told you about Sarai offers her servant Hagar to Abraham. And then the last really big thing that Abraham is known for, and that is the picture that we see there, is Abraham is asked to offer his son Isaac to the Lord. So this is something I'm going to leave it here for today, all right? And I want you to contemplate why you think that God would ask Abraham. We talked about this in the early bird classroom if you want the answer, because this was a story that we're on. Why would God ask Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac? And in scripture, it does tell us actually what God says to him. So he says, by faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises of offering up his only begotten son, it was he to whom it was said, in Isaac your descendant shall be called. He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he also received him back as a type. Okay, that's not what I wanted to read. But what that was saying is that why would Abraham be so willing to sacrifice his son? Because Abraham thought God would rise him from the dead. And that's the reason why. Why did God stop Abraham? Because it wasn't Isaac who was supposed to rise from the dead, right? Did God know Abraham would have offered his son for God? Of course God knew that. So why did God ask him to do that? Well, probably for our benefit, right? Probably for our benefit to show us what Abraham, our forefather, was willing to do for God. But at that moment in time, I believe it was to show Abraham what Abraham was willing to do for his God. Because a lot of people can speak a lot of things and say, I would give my firstborn son to my Lord, right? Or I would put my life on the line for my children. Or if there were a sinking ship, I would let women and children go first, right? We might say it, but when it comes right down to it, do we know what we would do? And do you know what you would do? The only way to know what you would do and be sure of it would be to test it, right? So God's testing of Abraham wasn't for God, because God knew what Abraham was going to choose. God's testing of Abraham was for Abraham, because Abraham likely didn't know what he would do. How could he do that? How could he do that? Almost sacrifice his son? Because he believed that God would raise his son. If God asked Abraham to do something like that, there would be a good reason for it. God just wouldn't give him his son Isaac and then take him away in such a violent manner. And that Abraham knew. That Abraham had faith in. He knew God's character. He knew God would not give him the son Isaac he had been waiting for all of these years, only to take him away in such an atrocious way. That was the faith that Abraham had. Okay, that's all I have for you today. We'll go back and we'll wrap this up tomorrow, Abraham, and then we are going to move on to, I think I'm going to move on to Moses. I'm not sure. I think that's what's next. We'll look. As you can see, I'm kind of preparing this on the fly, which is why I only had 45 minutes worth of stuff, because I kind of prepared this a little bit on the fly. I was working on my Bookless classroom a lot this weekend. Okay, this is Dr. Annette Feravich, and I am here in the classroom. Why? Because I'm the teacher, and this is the Spiritual Connection Classroom. I will see you tomorrow at the same time, 12:30, around there, something like that. Thanks for joining me.